So, in a lot of my favorite classics videos, I realize that I tend to focus on US and British classics because that's kind of where the canon takes us. But I did want to talk about some of my favorite classics in translation. The first one I have is probably no surprise. This is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This was, of course, translated from French, as Victor Hugo was a French author. How do you talk about Les Mis? Les Mis is a very complicated story with a lot of really amazing characters. And it spans such a long period of time that it's kind of hard to describe the plot, because the plot is very complicated. And I'm also very bad at describing plots. I think all of you know what Les Mis is about. You've probably seen adaptations, or at least have a vague idea. I love this book. I've read it twice, and once I've read the abridged version as well. So this is the unabridged version. I think as far as French classics go, you can't really go wrong with this book. I know it's huge and it can be a little daunting, but the story is amazing. The characters are amazing. The story breaks my heart every single time. I just think that it's beautiful and wonderful, and that everyone should read it, even though it's huge. I recommend you get a buddy and that you spend 2 months with this chunker and just do it, because it honestly changed my life. Keeping in the vein with French classics, I have Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. This is one of my favorite classics of all time, one of my favorite books of all time. This is the story of Emma Bovary and what happens to her life after she's read too many romance novels and then has unrealistic expectations for love in her own life. Of course, this is an oftentimes challenged book. It does deal with adultery, tisk tisk. But I think Emma Bovary is one of the most amazing characters ever. I love her. She is insane. And just this whole book is pure excellence. So I definitely recommend this. And my last French novel, I promise, is Nana by Émile Zola. This is the only one of Émile Zola's books that I've read, and he wrote a lot of novels. They're all kind of part of this series that has to do with a bunch of different families, so they all are kind of interconnected, but you can read them as standalones. This in particular is the story of a French courtesan. Her name is Nana, and she just devours men. She just picks them up, she takes all their money, and she crushes them under her feet. She's amazing. Highly recommend this to anyone who read The Crimson Petal and the White and loved it, because it's set in a similar time period as The Crimson Petal and the White. It does deal with prostitution and kind of a prostitute rising through the ranks of society. This is much bleaker, it's much darker, it's really depressing, but I just have not ever stopped thinking about this book since I read it, so I think you should read it too. I lied, there's one more novel that was written originally in French. That's The Plague by Albert Camus. A lot of people have read The Stranger or The Myth of Sisyphus. Those are things that are important. But this book is lesser known of his, and it kind of ruined me. It's about a town and what happens when they are quarantined because of a plague, and it follows a doctor and also a politician, I think. The details are a little blurry. And there's no blurb. Yeah, but it follows a couple of different characters. I think it's a doctor, a journalist, something like that. Anyway, in their struggle to kind of what happens in the town during this plague and how people react to it and how they react to being quarantined and cut off from the rest of society. And it was really, really dark. I did not love it when I finished it, but it's something that has kept me thinking for a long time, so I think I'm going to revisit it soon. It's not a very long read, but it's not a very quick read either, so don't go into it anticipating that. But yeah, it's just kind of really dark and messed up, but that's really no surprise from Camus, I guess. What would a translated classics video be without some Russian literature? I have for you Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I really need to reread this, first of all. Second of all, I read this when I was about 19, and I loved it. It probably took me 3 months to read. Again, this is huge, but it's well worth the time investment. I think everyone knows the story of Anna Karenina. I will say that it might be helpful before you go into this to do a kind of rapid-fire Russian history overview, because Tolstoy ties a lot about Russian history into the book, and that can be a little overwhelming and confusing if you're not familiar with Russian history. But I love this book. I love Anna. She's an amazing character. The ending of this book is very famous, very fucked up. And I think that you should read this one too, please. And lastly, I have a German classic. This is more of a modern classic. This is kind of a recent book, but it's already pretty huge, and I think it's destined for classics fame. This is Perfume by Patrick Süskind. This is the story of a character named Jean-Baptiste Grenouille. I don't speak French at all, not even a little bit. I just messed that up. Anyway, he is born with a incredible hyperactive sense of smell. Like, he can smell everything. And that's really disturbing and really gross in some scenes because smells are described very much in detail. But he becomes a murderer. The ending of this book is really messed up, really dark, will leave you thinking for a very long time. So again, you should probably read this. That is all I have for you today. Until next time.